I think geese have a very bad reputation as being very unworkable, aggressive animals, and some of them definitely are. We would to triple vegetable and fruit production. We
Wow.
underproduce vegetables by 1/3
Wow.
compared to
That's a
what we
lot.
need. So the magic wand is somehow about making people and our governments and economic systems functional in a basic way. It would be nice to make human beings act a little more rationally and a little more kindly.
Hey, welcome to a new episode of the Food Forest podcast. And today we have a very special guest, Eric Toensmeier, one of my personal heroes. If you think about agroforestry, about food forests, about perennials, then one of the names that should pop into your mind is Eric Toensmeier. Why? He's written several fantastic books, is a pioneer in perennial vegetables, and is also very big into carbon farming solutions. He even wrote a book about it, The Carbon Farming Solution. It's a very thick book. I really love to read. It's already, a heavy used, that book, full of numbers. Eric, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Well, thanks for having me.
So, Eric, if you think about perennials and your life, how did the two came together?
Sure. Let's see. So back in 1989 and 1990, I had graduated from high school and I went to work at a nature center. And they basically kind of randomly brought me along to a conference and recommended that I go to a talk on permaculture there.
Hmm.
And there I was exposed to the idea of ecosystems that produce food or farming and gardening systems that work like nature. And that was just instantly became what I wanted to do with the rest of my life and still is now, many years later. And it became clear within a few years that what I needed to know about and where there was one of the places where there was a real gap was what kinds of perennial plants can grow in those food producing ecosystems. So that's become sort of a lifelong challenge as well. And there's new ones every single year. It's constantly a constant learning process, both for my climate and now I'm sort of learning all of the world's plants as well, or learning the world's useful plants. So
Yeah, perennial plants. Some people have never heard the term perennial. How would you explain that?
sure, it means plants that live for 3 years or more. I like to say between 3,000 and 3,000 years. And so that would include trees, but also some vines live a long time, like grapevines, or some herbaceous plants can live for many years. Some succulents like cacti and agaves. There are aquatic plants that are perennials. So there are bamboos, palms, lots of different life forms within the category of perennials. It just means they live for a long time.
Yeah. In one of the books that I've read that you wrote, you say that one of the best climates to grow perennials are the tropics and the subtropics. Is that true?
Well, yeah, in that they have an incredible diversity to choose from, a much greater plant diversity to choose from. Many of their perennial crops are much more highly domesticated than ours in colder climates. They can eat from them year round. And they tend to make food more quickly after planting. So you can plant a banana and eat bananas in 18 months. Most of our fruit and nut trees are a good bit slower than that to begin producing. On the other hand, they have all kinds of pests and diseases that we don't have. I never have elephants or fruit bats or monkeys eating my fruit, for example. We don't have some of those terrible nematode problems that can go after the roots of trees. So it's easy to fantasize that things will be better somewhere else than where you are. And everywhere I've ever been, people wish they could grow things from somewhere else. I'll go to Mexico and they wish they could grow blueberries. So I think, but in terms of just in terms of, say, the ability of perennials to produce staple food like protein and fat and carbohydrates at a yield, at a productivity, like tons per hectare produced, compared to annual staple crops in the tropics, those crops are ready to be competitive with. The trees are ready to be competitive with annual crops in the way that they are not in cold climates.
Yeah.
That's
For example,
right now.
with the chestnut trees, they're fantastic, but they only have about 2 tons per hectare. But if you have oil palm and you can have regenerative oil palm as well, then you're like, yeah, it's one of the most yielding crops per acre, right?
Yeah. Oil palm, bananas, coconuts, avocado. There are many mesquites, some of the mesquites from Latin America. There are some truly remarkable staple crop producing plants in the tropics that our nuts are wonderful and someday may achieve parity with our annual crops, but they're not there yet in terms of yield. They also can grow in places where those annual crops won't grow or shouldn't grow, like on slopes and hills, or they can be mixed in with annual crops and agroforestry systems, so we can get around those yield issues. But boy, it would be amazing to have peach palm or some of these other things available to us up here. There are real differences currently. I don't they're biophysical. I don't think they're inherent problems, that can't be overcome, but that reflects where we are right now in the plant breeding work. Yeah.
But you did live in the subtropics, right? Paradise Lot is a place that has become legendary in the world of perennials and food forests and permaculture. It was a tenth of an acre and you grew more than 200 species. A transformation of lifeless urban soil, like just a regular garden turned into this paradise. Was it in Florida?
That was actually here in Massachusetts. That was a temperate climate garden that had a very subtropical jungle-like feel in the summer, and still does. In fact, right now it
still exists
here. Yeah, and the people who are taking care of it are doing a good job, and it is extremely jungle-like in the summertime right now. Yeah.
So even if it's not subtropical or tropical and it's a temperate climate, it's in Massachusetts, you are still able to grow so many species and also have this subtropical kind of feeling. How did you do that?
Well, we have a lot of temperate relatives of tropical plants. So we have like hardy bamboo and we have hardy bananas. And so partly it was leaning into that. Partly it was adopting a real tropical style of gardening with kind of very intense biomass production and chopping that a lot to use it as mulch, planting really densely. I have a dear friend who spent about 20 years running a seed bank in Thailand, Rick Burnett, and he was very kind enough to say that it was the most tropical looking temperate garden he had ever seen. My neighbor,
that's a nice compliment.
Was a mess. And then we had a subtropical greenhouse, an unheated, no electricity, insulated greenhouse that grew citrus very successfully. So we had a subtropical portion of the garden that involved zero energy use and was, I think it was 80% recycled materials and on and on. So we had a real piece of the subtropics year round so that we did have fresh leaves to eat every single day of the year. And once the citrus came into its own, we had fresh fruit every single day of the year too, which is a really nice thing to have, a lovely thing to have.
And what kind of citrus trees were you growing?
Well, we weren't growing the most tropical ones. We were growing citrus that can handle some cold. So lemons, like Meyer lemon, Suma tangerines that are a little more cold tolerant, and calamandan, which is a cross of tangerine and kumquat. So all of those could handle, let's say, 4 or 5 below 0 Celsius. So we protected them a lot with the building, and then we chose species that were, somewhat more hardy within the world of citrus. But certainly if you wanted to go and see those here, you would outside, you would have to drive 35 hours south of here. So, yeah.
And were you also growing the Citrus trifoliata?
I was not. I have grown that outdoors, and it grows well here outdoors. I just don't think it tastes good. I don't.
Yeah, you have to process it.
Yeah, with the hybrids that people are working on, I think in another 20 or 30 years, we'll have some great outdoor citrus. But it always tastes to me like if you just brush your teeth with minty toothpaste and then drink orange juice right after, that horrible taste like that.
I don't think it's that horrible, but I get what you're going at. Yeah. So, last year I visited you in your beautiful farmstead in Massachusetts. We had some wonderful pupusas, a dish that I really love. And I saw that you have a big collection of plants with edible leaves and that you also written a book about it, which is free available online. You told me that it's one of the biggest opportunities out there that we are not tapping into. Can you go on about that for me, please?
Yeah, so I had known for a long time now that there were some trees with edible leaves, including some that could grow here, but I had never really thought about them as a category in quite that way before. So I was doing an article on the world's cultivated perennial vegetables. We found over 600 species of cultivated perennial vegetables. We looked at the nutritional composition of both annual and perennial vegetables, particularly their ability to meet the nutrients that humanity is most deficient in. So the things we really most need that we have the least that we're suffering from the lack of, which are different nutrients in different parts of the world, but it's a relatively short list. And the group that jumped out as a class as the most nutritious was trees with edible leaves. They were really strikingly, it is not at all uncommon for them to be more than twice as high as annual vegetables, as the common annual vegetables, in, let's say, 3 or 4 different nutrients. So there's really like sort of, I don't like the term superfood particularly, but they are extremely dense in the nutrients which humanity is suffering for the lack of. So, and also they have all the other benefits of trees in that they sequester carbon and reduce erosion and do all those other things. What was really interesting was to learn that even though there are more than 100 species grown around the world of trees with edible leaves, again, almost all of them in the tropics, but we have some nice ones for cold climates, they're almost all grown the same way, no matter where you may live, which made it possible to do a global book. Usually people coppice them or prune them back to about, let's say, 1 meter high once or twice a year, and they resprout. And partly that makes it easy to harvest them because a 30-meter tree is not something you want to climb to pick the leaves from. But also that the regrowth from when they're pruned hard like that stays tender for a really long time. For me, it's, let's say, 3 to 5 months of tender growth. It's quite lovely. And in many places, like in semi-arid tropical places, they will often stay tender well into the dry season. So that's really important as well to have.
And why is it good that they're tender?
Well, they taste better. Their texture is good to eat. Once they get older and tougher, to me, they're nice to feed to livestock, but not to people anymore. So you want that tender vegetable stage. In much the same way that a lot of our annual vegetables, once they begin to flower, they become tough and bitter. So there's a stage where you want to eat those. It's sort of the same thing for the trees, only it's more of a seasonal issue rather than being related to flowering.
Yeah, you told me that mulberry is a very special tree. In a lot of parts in the world, we're busy doing a protein shift. We want to shift our proteins more from animals to plant-based proteins. You told me that mulberry trees have more protein per hectare or per acre than soybeans. Is that correct? Or about the same?
They have very high protein. We can't access it all very easily because it's bound to fiber. Generally, people and other mammals with our type digestive system that are not ruminants, we can't get all the protein we need from leaves very easily, but there's a process where you can create sort of a cheese or tofu from leaves called leaf protein concentrate. And you can really extract incredible amounts of protein, and the yields of protein have been higher than soybeans in some cases for those systems. And a number of trees with edible leaves are very well suited to leaf protein concentrate production. You need a serious juicer to do it.
Yeah.
I'm going to purchase one soon, a great big industrial size thing, so that I can make it at scale for my own use and for workshops and stuff here. And maybe there's a business to somebody needs to be starting a business around that.
Yeah, can you quickly guide me through the steps you have to take? So you pick the leaves, and what do you do with them?
Sure, and I'll say there's a facility making it commercial. There's a facility making it in France actually as a byproduct of making alfalfa pellets for livestock. So there is a facility in Europe making it now, sort of by accident almost.
Oh, great. You know the name?
I don't remember, but I could find it for you when we're done, and you could put it up for folks if you like.
Thanks.
They give it all away for like disaster relief projects for protein and vitamins when there's famines and disasters and stuff.
That's nice.
But the way you make it is really simple. First, you juice the leaves, just like if you were making wheatgrass juice or kale juice. And then you simmer it for about 30 seconds. And the protein coagulates out. So if you've ever made cheese or made tofu, it's very much the same process. You're coagulating the proteins. And I always simmer it. There are also chemicals you can add, just like there's different ways to make cheese. There are different...
Like vinegar or citrus, right? You add
for
to coagulate it?
cheeses. Yeah, this one, I don't understand all the chemicals that they use. I just simmer for 30 seconds, and then you strain it like through a cheesecloth or some other kind of very fine. I use a nut milk strainer, but same basic idea. And then you have the curd, the leaf protein, which people have first made, I think, in the 1870s. It's not a new technology. And then that can be pressed on its own. Mostly does not taste good. It's very strongly flavored. I think it tastes sort of like wheatgrass juice, which is not, to me, a delicious flavor. But you just mix it with things. And also, you can't cook it. I tried to like cook the cubes of it, and they turned black the instant they got onto the stove. So, but wonderful if you mix it with hummus. It's wonderful if you mix it with avocados. You mix it with masa to make tortillas. You mix it in when you're making bread. You mix it in when you're making pasta. So it's more like something you add to other things rather than eat on its own. And then basically it gets rid of all the water and fiber and leaves the vitamins, minerals, and protein, which is pretty cool. And that enables us to become like a ruminant and get everything out of the leaves, even though we don't have a rumen. It's sort of an artificial or something in a way. You could think about it like that. And I think it's the most climate-friendly protein there is, in that it uses a very small area and it can be produced from perennials.
And you don't till the soil, you have carbon capturing. The only thing that people are probably thinking now is, okay, but then who is going to pick all the leaves? How does that work? Like on a large scale, let's say you want 20 acres or something, or 10 hectares.
On a large scale, they use, it's not being done on a really large scale. But what they have done in experiments is use the same equipment they use to make hay. Right. Or you use a silage chopper, like a forage chopper that harvests, let's say, grass and clover. Or you could use the short rotation coppice kind of technology that's being used in Europe. And you just shred the leaves and you put them into whatever, a bag, or you blow them into a truck or something. And then those would go to a huge juicer somewhere. Really a rotary screw press, like a giant turning screw. You would send it through that and it would expel the water. And how does it work? Yeah. And then it would expel the juice, and then you would use heat or chemicals to coagulate the protein out of the juice.
Yeah. And they've been growing mulberry trees in China for the silkworm. Are they like automatizing the harvest there?
Well, it's interesting. So they have been growing it in mulberry for over 1,000 years. So it's one of the tree leaves that we know the most about growing. And they are a really good leaf for people to eat. What happens there is that the most tender leaves are fed to silkworms. And actually the leftover leaves that aren't good enough for silkworms are dried and powdered and added to all kinds of baked goods all through China.
Okay.
So they're not making leaf protein concentrate from it. It's just powdered leaves, but it's still very good for you. And we've ordered in the product online, and it's quite nice. You can make a really nice, like a matcha from it, or you can add it to things you bake.
Might be the new hipster rage, because the matcha in the world is the production is like too low for all the hipsters wanting to drink delicious matcha tea.
Need some more mulberry matcha enterprises to come along.
All right, I smell a business opportunity.
I do think that there should be any number of businesses doing this, because it would be so easy to run, let's say, a hummus business. We already have hummus businesses. You're just adding another ingredient to it. It would make it bright green, which I think some people would really think was cool.
Definitely.
And I do feel like it represents a really exciting major vegan protein source that's being essentially totally neglected. It has been looked at as a product for livestock. And in fact, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change wrote some very nice things about it in 2014, thinking about it as a livestock feed. And maybe that's its first use, is replacing soybeans in of, pigs and chickens and livestock that cannot eat grass. We can still turn grass or tree leaves into protein for them, because like us, they're monogastric. They can't get everything they need from leaves alone, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
a little hack to get around that biological limitation.
Yeah. If you look in your book, Trees with Edible Leaves, you also see that you write that one of the most nutritious vegetables on this planet are actually tree leaves.
Yeah, I really was surprised by that not all tree leaves are spectacular. Some of them are just okay, but the great majority of the ones that we have information for are really at a very high level. There's been a lot of interest for many years in moringa, which is a tropical tree that is indeed extremely nutritious. And I know a bunch of the folks at the Educational Concerns for Hunger organization who've been a big part of driving that for all these years. But it was really surprising in working on that book and on the paper that preceded it to find that moringa level nutrition is achieved by at least a dozen other trees. It's not it is extraordinary in that it is wonderful, but it is not unique at all. There are a lot of other trees. Every climate where you can grow trees with edible leaves, including mine and yours, has moringa level nutrition plants. You can grow like mulberry, like Chinese tune, and on down the list. So seems like we need to do that. I also learned in the book that the world underproduces. If we were going to grow all the vegetables and fruits that we needed to address the nutrient deficiencies that people have, we would need to triple vegetable and fruit production. We underproduce vegetables by 1/3
Wow,
compared to
that's a
what
lot.
we need. So while I don't think we're going to get people to stop eating lettuce and start eating these trees, given that we need to add more vegetable land, why shouldn't some of that be in trees with edible leaves and people can add them to their diets? There are places where people have been eating these forever and it's totally common, like in much of sub-Saharan Africa, baobab leaves are very commonly eaten, and in other places there are other tree leaves that are eaten commonly. But for many of us, particularly in Europe and North America, it's a very new and strange idea.
Vine rolls, that's something we know from Greece, where they take the leaves from grapevines, and put some rice inside of it. But other than that, we don't use a lot of them.
And actually, you can do that very well with mulberry leaves too.
Yeah.
They make a great wrap or some varieties that have a nice big leaf make a very nice wrap like that.
Yeah, they're mostly like high in fiber, calcium, magnesium, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E. What is your top 10 favorite edible leaves from your climate?
Let's see. Okay. Well, one's from the book, The Mulberry Leaf, and not all varieties taste good. It's really, we've been doing a lot of taste tests here. The very best one is a variety called Chuck Shields. I don't know if it's available in Europe, but it is delicious and the texture is fantastic.
Chuck Shields, all right.
Matter of testing which ones are good where you live. There's another called Fruitless that I really like, which is a male, so it doesn't even waste energy on fruit production. So mulberry is fantastic. I love Chinese tune, which tastes like chicken soup, which is incredible. It's an umami flavored leaf, and again, thinking about alternatives to animal protein, not necessarily going all the way vegan and even, but just, how much can we shift everyone's diet in that direction? It's a good idea in terms of climate, and something that brings that umami flavor is really great. So that's one I love. See, I like European linden a lot. Little leaf linden, I like a lot. We have one here. It's not cultivated. It's a wild one called sassafras, which is fantastic. Mostly these are cooked, not eaten raw. That one's really, really nice when you cook it. I love that one. Let's see, there are a bunch of members of the Aralia family, mostly from temperate Asia. So we have Aralia alata, which I think in Europe they call Japanese angelica tree. There's castor Aralia, there's five-leaf Aralia. Some of those are very weedy outside of their native home, but I've come to really appreciate the flavor. I don't grow the Japanese angelica tree. It grows wild not far from me, so I go pick them from there, but I grow the other
Really
two.
cool.
And they have a powerful and unique, fascinating flavor. They're in the ginseng family, and they're closely related to the umbels. So they have maybe some parsley in their flavor and some like metallic bitterness and some other like unique rich. I've been working with some chefs here with them because to us they're new. I mean, people in South Korea have eaten them for thousands of years, but to us these are very new and interesting
Just eat the shoots, right?
flavors.
Not only the leaves?
Some of these are the shoots, like Castor Aurelia is the shoot. The 5-leaf Aurelia, you prune as a head, so you can take leaves off of it every 2 weeks all summer long, which is great. And the edible leaf goji, I really like a lot as well. In parts of Europe, you can grow tree purslane or saltbush, Atroplex haumas, which I think is lovely. It won't grow for me here; it's too cold for it, but.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a fantastic vegetable. And also, and all of those are in that, all of them but linden are in that moringa level nutrition category. So if you're incorporating these vegetables into your diet, you're getting a lot of nutrition for a very limited amount of work. In fact, one of the stories I like to tell is I was at a conference at Educational Concerns for Hunger organization after my first perennial vegetables book came out, and there was a lovely guy there from Mozambique who runs he's South African. He was running a project in Mozambique, a gardening program for people living with HIV. And he found that the trees with edible leaves were by far the most popular, because you don't have to bend over to harvest them. And once they're planted, you don't have to dig or turn the soil. So there's so much less labor, and they're, highly productive and very nutritious. And I thought that was not something I ever thought about when I wrote that book, but it's a great example of how sometimes doing things to make things better for people with disabilities make things better for everyone.
Yeah.
We all could use nutritious, productive vegetables that are easy to grow and don't.
Who doesn't want that? Yeah.
I certainly want that. And I would say their seasonality is very complementary to annual vegetables as well. Like the perennial vegetables, herbaceous perennial vegetables, I should say, the ones that die back every year, like nettles and asparagus, they tend to produce very well in the spring. For me, they're on like April and May, let's say. Trees with edible leaves, most of them are coming on in maybe mid-May, and then they'll run through September. And then I get herbaceous perennials again in the fall. So you're getting some dividing out the season nicely. And the annual vegetables, I actually mostly grow as winter vegetables in my greenhouse.
All right.
Spinach and stuff. So then I switch to annuals for the winter. I don't really grow annual vegetables. I don't grow annual leaf crops in the summer anymore at all, because tree leaves are always there for me. So I'll grow tomatoes. We don't have a good perennial tomato here yet, but I'll grow those kinds of things. But mostly I really have been able to shift for outdoor greens entirely to perennials and really just do the winter vegetables inside the greenhouse, because they're so tender and good, like mizuna and spinach and mustard and stuff in a winter greenhouse are just absolutely divine gourmet vegetables. They last a long time, whereas outdoors here they will flower quickly and not good to eat anymore. So I'm really looking for that year-round, very nutritious, very tasty vegetables with as little work as possible.
Yeah, and it's so undescribable, the taste that winter vegetables have, because it's so condensed. It's actually one of my favorite seasons to eat the winter vegetables. Let's say you want to get started with the perennial leaves from trees like mulberry, like linden, like all the ones you just talked about. Would you just like plant them very densely close together? And then like plant one row like every foot or every meter.
Sure.
How would you go out and advise people to start planting them as
Yeah,
efficient as possible?
There are a lot of different ways that the general system that seems to be, if I was to take this sort of the global wisdom of how to do it, is within a row, you would plant them 1 meter apart, and then you would cut them about 1 meter high every year. And you could do that in double rows. So they would be 1 meter by 1 meter in a double row. And then you would have a 2 meter wide pathway between them, because actually they grow pretty big during the season. So you need to have access to get through. So you'd have a path and then a double row and a path and then a double row. You can also just mix them around in a much more free way. Something I've learned from the tropics is that they'll often do every third row as a nitrogen fixing coppice plant. So in that case, you could do a nitrogen fixing row in the middle, tree vegetable row on either side, and then a path, and then repeat that, because they do produce better with more fertilization. Mulberry in particular responds you could almost can't over fertilize it. It'll just keep producing and producing the more you feed it.
That's nice. But then you need 3 meters of row, or can you like put them closer together? If you have like leaf producing, nitrogen fixing, leaf producing.
I like them 1 meter apart just so they get enough room to spread their branches, because they will grow 3 meters or higher off of every sprout every year. So they need some room. You can plant them much closer together, even as little as 10 centimeters, if you're going to cut them very frequently. And that's what we see in commercial moringa production and some kinds of mulberry production. But again, in that case, you need to fertilize very intensely. I'm more into the like lower maintenance kind of system. That's me. Oh, and then some are grown as a hedge, where you would plant them more like 30 centimeters, like edible leaf goji and the 5-leaf Aurelia or tree purslane. You would plant them, let's say 30 centimeters, maybe it's in a double row. And then you just maintain that as a hedge. You sort of trim across the top, whatever frequency you would for a hedge where you live, and then you can eat those trimmings all through the season. So I kind of like that way of doing things as well.
Are there nitrogen fixing trees with edible leaves as well?
There are a great many, not very good ones for our cold climate.
Too bad.
The one that I work with here is Lespedeza bicolor. It's a Chinese bush clover, but I don't think it tastes very good. It tastes about as good as white clover leaf, which is to say, not fantastic.
It's not horrible either.
But not horrible. However, and you can't, when I was talking about leaf protein concentrate, not all species will make leaf protein concentrate. Some do and some don't. I have made it successfully from this Chinese bush clover. So I have a lot of that here, and I'm going to be experimenting and doing leaf protein concentrate at a larger scale from that.
Yeah, and are there also evergreens with edible leaves besides the pine tree?
Let's see. Well, that tree purslane is evergreen in the
salt bush.
The salt bush, yes. I would say that of the temperate trees with edible leaves that you would actually eat as a vegetable, we don't have much to speak of for evergreen. Like the laurel bay tree, Laurus nobilis, is evergreen, and we use it to flavor things, but I wouldn't sit down and I wouldn't cook a bowl of it.
Would be a bit too much, maybe.
Yeah. In humid tropical climates, there are indeed some very nice evergreen species, or in more Mediterranean climates even. But in temperate climates, we unfortunately don't have much to work with there.
Yeah. It's lovely to talk with you, Eric, about things that people don't consider to be edible or don't know that they're edible. Another one in this row is the acorn. We see oak trees everywhere, but most people think they're poisonous because as a child you bite in it and then it's like super bitter, and it is bitter and it is poisonous if you don't remove the tannins. Can you tell me a bit about your odyssey going into the acorn world?
Yeah, sure. Well, let's see. Some have less tannins than others. I don't know of any that have no tannins. The first thing is you can process acorns to remove the tannins. And the tannins themselves are a useful product. In fact, there are large plantations of other species of trees around the world that are grown just for their tannins, because they're used in tanning leather and other kinds of they're important chemicals that we use in things, both very ancient practices like tanning leather and modern things. And there are factories in China and in South Korea that commercially process out the tannins from acorns to make edible starch products from them.
So it already exists, like large-scale commercial processing plants. We
Yeah.
just have to get the technology to the USA, to Europe, get all the acorns together, put it in the machines, and there we are.
Well, there are some other challenges too. So one challenge is the tannins, which there is a solution for, and there are any number of ways of doing that. But there are like literally already factories that do this and produce. I don't know. It's over. I want
Do you
to
do
say
it in your toilet, Eric?
I have not. I've done it in streams before. I prefer to. Right now, I grow chestnuts, but I am growing a bunch of grafted oaks of these sweet. Okay, so the other challenges besides the tannins, one is oaks take a long time to make acorns. From when you plant them, you wait a long time. So that's what we would like there is called precociousness. We would like them to produce when they're young. Two is most oaks don't produce every year. In fact, it seems like the great majority of them produce only once every 4 or 5 years in any serious way. And I like to eat every year myself.
Yeah, of course.
And even then, the yields tend to be kind of low. So those are a whole bunch of challenges. And then there are some other kinds of issues that are faced. So the place in the world that has done, whereas Eastern Asia has done a great job commercializing the use of kind of random wild oaks. They just take them as they are and process them and collect them, and that's great. The place that has done the most work to domesticate the oak is Spain and Portugal. There's been some wonderful work done, partly because they have some really amazing oaks to work with, but also I think just culturally it became part of agriculture there in a different way.
Also for the jamón ibérico, the special ham.
Right. So when you already are paying attention to acorns to feed pigs, maybe you're thinking about them more for people as well. And people have eaten acorns in Europe for, millennia. Well, during the periods when it was warm enough for oaks to grow, people have always eaten them there. But there are a number of really elite oaks in Spain that produce well, that produce on a regular basis, that are very sweet and not so high in tannins. There's a wonderful group there called Balano trees, who I interviewed for my article on oaks that came out a few years ago, who've been identifying these elite trees and grafting them and making them available to other folks. I should mention also that Martin Crawford in the UK has been planting elite oaks from around the world, I think mostly seedlings.
Yeah.
Which I haven't asked him about it lately, but are probably now beginning to actually produce acorns. So then you can start to identify which ones are the good ones. It's just a slow job. Breeding oaks is slow because the generations are slow. So I'm growing some now. One of the ones I'm growing was selected maybe 120 years ago. Then I'm growing some that are the offspring of that, grafted trees that are the offspring of that. So then I will grow these out and cross them to each other 10 years from now or whenever they start to bear. The grafted oaks can bear much more quickly than seedlings. A few of mine flowered the first year in the pot.
Wow.
So you get some, not have to wait quite so long.
And then your grandchild will be able to pick the fruits of the crossings.
Of those crossings. So it's a multi-generational process. To get the oak to where we want it to be is a very long road, but also we could make use of them as they are right now. I have a neighbor who drives a little golf cart machine that picks up golf balls, but they use it to harvest acorns.
Interesting.
They bring them to pork producers and they feed them to their pigs, and then they market the pork together as acorn-fed pork. Here are jamón ibérico.
The Massachusetts.
So I think we could be doing much more. And I should add that the indigenous people in California here in the U.S. have eaten oaks for thousands of years and have carried the processing and cuisine of oaks to a very high level and continue to do so to this very day. Although I'm sure not at the scale that is happening in China and South Korea. So there are these sort of hot spots of work with oaks. There are some exciting things happening in Greece right now as well.
Yeah, on an island near Athens, right?
Yeah. So there is some interest. There are also people here starting to press oil from oaks because some oaks are very high in oil and it's a very good quality oil. So I think, and as far as I know, there's been no breeding work anywhere in the world on oaks for oil, no selecting of the
Yeah.
best trees for oil, no nothing. The nice thing with oaks is they hybridize very well naturally and also artificially. And in botanic gardens, they accidentally hybridize all the time. So there is, and the traits we want in terms of bearing every year, bearing when they're young, bearing heavily, low tannins, good flavors, resistance to weevils and other pests, all of those exist. It's just getting them all into one tree. And some people have proposed, why would we worry about getting them low tannins? Let's just get high yielding, you
Yeah.
know, early bearing oaks and then process the tannins out.
And
That's
just remove the tannins. Yeah. Yeah.
or
For
just
the
the pigs. And there is breeding work on those lines happening in Spain, and there's some of that happening here for deer hunters who want trees that will attract deer.
Yeah,
So
smart move. Trees
yeah,
that are good for the climate and are feeding people, feeding animals. Like for example, Spain, good cultivars that you described in your study are the Quercus rotundifolia, like Horta, Andres, Finojosa, Antigua, Gitana, and then United States like Quercus macrocarpa, different sorts, are also Quercus bicolor. And I would just recommend the listener to check out the little booklet that you've written about it. Super interesting. So we've been from the edible leaves to edible acorns. A thing that people also sometimes overlook if they grow a food forest is animals. When I visited, you had kind of cows, but they had wings. They're called geese. You don't use ruminants but geese to mow the grass and you use them to have eggs and also do you eat them?
we do. We do. Goose is not a real popular meat here, but I know in lots of Europe people have eaten geese for a very, very, very long time. I think for our scale, we actually just got rid of them this year for now. I'm still working on getting my pastures healthy enough that they're ready to. Our soil here is so bad that I need to have more grass before I can keep geese happy all through the year. Some of the advantages of them, well, one at a very small scale, they make sense. And once the trees are tall enough, they don't mess with the leaves on the trees. With young trees, I found they will pick the leaves off. Even though they're not eating them, they'll just tear them up for fun. Problem for me.
Horrible.
The tree is 2 meters tall. A goose can't eat anything of it anymore. So you're totally free and clear at that point. I like that they graze just like any other grazing animal, but because they're not ruminants, they don't produce methane. So I'm really thinking about methane. Not that I think all ruminants are bad, but they definitely produce methane and looking for alternatives to that. And for a certain scale, I think they're really very appropriate. And I love eggs. And cows don't produce eggs very well. So
Not yet.
I think there is a place for geese in the food forest. They also are very much more picky about what they eat than cows or goats or anything. So they will really mostly only want to eat grass and clover. So they're a little more compatible with a diverse understory. Although, again, I have been finding that they will tear things up for fun and poop all over them, even if they're not eating them. I have, however, seen food forests with geese done very successfully in Mexico, where they don't mess with things like sweet potatoes and ginger and cardamom and turmeric and other species in the understory. They really just weed out the grass around them. So I think it's maybe a matter of finding the right breed and training them the right way and going through a process to arrive at the right geese and the right.
Did you have a breed that like doesn't attack people?
Yes, they were very friendly actually. Pilgrim geese, they're called.
Pilgrim is a name.
They only become aggressive when they're sitting on their nest.
Okay.
For a brief period. And even then, compared to other geese, they're very, very mild mannered. Or you could raise only females. It's really the males that are more aggressive there. I think geese have a very bad reputation as being very unworkable, aggressive animals, and some of them definitely are. But also there are between how you raise them and what breed you work with, I think they could be a much more common part of our food forest and agroforestry management than they are.
And more than chickens.
Yeah, chickens like to scratch in the understory, which is not great. So they make bare soil and then weeds come in. They also will eat almost everything. So they're much less compatible with a diverse understory of perennial vegetables. We've also raised Muscovy ducks, which, like chickens, don't scratch, which is really nice. And they taste the best of all of those kinds of poultry, I think. I really find they taste like somewhere between like a pot roast made of beef, like a tender stewed, like a slow cooked beef, or maybe a slow cooked pork shoulder. I ate one the other day, just absolutely really delicious meat. And mostly they like to eat insects, which can make them a good companion in certain kinds of food forest understories, although their manure is really not something you'd want on any of your leaf crops for sure. So I think it would be a matter of time with any of these poultry, any livestock in the understory of a food forest. You want to think very carefully about when you bring them in, when you need them and when you don't need them, and rotating them very carefully, as people do in rotational grazing with other livestock. But even I think more because we're trying to grow delicate and delicious things in the understory, we really need to think about when we want to have birds present. Guinea hens is another one that don't scratch very much.
Okay.
And taste delicious. And mostly eat insects. I think they eat about 90% insects.
Yeah.
So what are those right birds to mix in? That's the question.
Yeah, indeed. And Muscovy ducks, they're also used for pest control, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So even if you're a vegetarian, you can also just keep them for pest control and also for the eggs. If you eat eggs, you don't necessarily have to kill them. What about cows and other ruminants or other grazers? If you look at a larger scale, agroforestry or food forests, you've been writing about carbon farming solutions. Do you see a compatibility between the two of them?
Yeah, I think we see lots of examples around the world of grazing under tree crops. So like one maybe the most widespread example is grazing under coconuts.
Oh, really?
There are millions of hectares of grazing under coconuts. It's very, very common silvopasture system. Silvopasture, when you combine trees with grazing land. One of the reasons is that they graze the grass down low enough that you can find the coconuts when they're all on the ground.
That's handy.
At a very simple level. But also the coconuts tend to let a good amount of light through for the pasture, but still provide enough shade that the cows in the tropics, it's very hot and cows are very uncomfortable in the heat. So you're really doing something that makes your work easier of harvest, makes the cows happier, keeps the trees happy as well by keeping the weeds down underneath. So that's a good example of a really time-tested system that has been done for, I'm sure people have been grazing cows under coconuts for as long as there have been coconut plantations. So for thousands of years, people have been growing coconuts. And then there's orchard grazing of all different kinds, and people have done that around the world for, again, you want to make sure the trees, again, are big enough that the animals don't browse the trees themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've even heard of an example here in California where there are very large olive groves where the trees are over 100 years old. And they're actually at that point using goats because the olives will sucker from the base. They'll send up shoots from the base and they use the goats to control those.
Smart move.
Now, big enough, the goats can't harm them, but you can use the goats for pruning the low sprouts off of the trees. So there's even a place for goats. But then there are systems where you're growing the trees to feed the animals. So the shade is really important. And in a warming world, shade is more and more important for livestock. And it's not only to be nice to them, but also it will increase their productivity if they're not heat stressed.
Economically, it also makes sense, with cow comfort that is much higher if they're in the shade. So it's like, even if you don't care about the climate, even if you don't care about animal welfare and only care about your wallet, you'd be stupid not to do it.
If you want more meat or if you want more milk, it is the way to achieve
plant trees.
Goals. Yeah. But then we can actually, and again, some of these are very old, ancient systems. You can raise, like the dehesa in Spain, where the acorns are feeding pigs. We can raise trees to feed the livestock. So one version of that is where they drop fruits and nuts into the field. So things like here it would be honey locust, or in parts of Europe it's carob. Around the world there are legume trees that are grown in that way. Or various other kinds of fruits and nuts. Not all of them are good for ruminants, but in many places there is at least something that they will appreciate and enjoy, especially though the legume pods are particularly a good choice for ruminants.
Would you say it's a waste of space and a waste of opportunity, like not to have animals in your food forest or agroforestry?
It depends on the system. But you could say that where you can have them and add them in, it sort of makes bonus food. They're not suitable for all systems, and they're certainly not suitable in every week of a given or in every stage of the life of a system. But where you can have them, if they can reduce your labor and do some of your work for you, and if they can make extra food, then, well, gosh, it seems like, for example, in nut orchards, we may want all of the nuts that are good, but there will also be a certain percentage of the nuts that have worms in them. And
pigs will eat those.
Nuts with worms in them. So they're actually, and if you leave those nuts on the ground, the pest will complete its life cycle and come back worse in the next year. So running pigs through an orchard or a nut bearing agroforestry system at the right time of year after your harvest is finished can actually improve your pest control. That's not enough to let you grow pigs all year, but you can maybe finish pigs that are in their last, month before being slaughtered or something, and that can be a really good niche that those systems might fill. And then when you look at traditional agroforestry systems around the world, often animals were brought in at one stage. Even the systems that are growing, like parkland agroforestry, which is a very widespread system in the Sahel and Africa, they're growing crops under widely spaced trees. But then in the dry season, they bring in livestock to eat the crop residues and to leave manure behind and to sort of clean up the field and get it ready for harvest. So, but they're not there all year. They wouldn't want them there when they're growing their corn. No. Sorghum or whatever. So it's about when they come. And in any good grazing system, you're thinking about when you want to graze or not. But again, when you're integrating trees, you have to be more careful. If you're integrating annual crops, you have to be even more careful.
Definitely, yeah.
When they're coming. And in some cases that makes the carbon footprint of the livestock improved as well. Not in all cases, but in many cases those sorts of livestock integration can improve the carbon footprint of livestock production in different ways.
Well, that brings us exactly to the last part of this episode that I would like to talk about. You've written this fantastic book, The Carbon Farming Solution. You're also part of Project Drawdown.
Yeah.
I'd love you to explain as simply as possible what Project Drawdown is, what carbon farming is, and also talk a bit about the controversy of cows or other grazers in those systems, which of course we're also always looking at the methane production they have. Is what they're doing at the good side of the spectrum good enough to counter this methane, stuff like that? So let's dive in, Eric.
Okay, we'll take those one at a time. So first, what's Project Drawdown is an NGO based in the United States that looks at climate solutions that are already mature, that we already know how to do them. They're already being done at scale and they're growing. So we love things that are new and great, but our focus is really on things that are
proven.
Already at scale and scaling. And we look at all different sectors of civilization. So buildings and transportation and industry and waste and land and oceans and food production and so on. And the way that John Foley, who's our director, I love his framing, is he says that we could think of climate change as being like a sink that is overflowing. So the water coming out of the faucet is the greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere, and it's overflowing, and now there's water on the floor. So the first thing you do when your sink is overflowing is you turn it off. You turn off the faucet. That's stopping emissions or reducing emissions. And the next thing you do is you mop up the water on the floor. That's sequestering carbon, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it in soils and in trees and so on. And I should add to that In the case of carbon sequestration in agricultural land, not in wetlands where it can go on forever, but in agricultural land and in ecosystems, non-wetland ecosystems on land, it only goes on for so many decades until it slows down and stops. So it doesn't go forever. It sort of reaches a level where it's actually continuing, but the amount being brought down is balanced out by the amount that's being released, because nature likes to seek an equilibrium when it can. So I would say we're not only turning off the faucet and mopping up the water, but we're putting that water that we're mopping off of the floor into a bucket, and we only have the one bucket. So you really can't leave the faucet on if you're mopping into one bucket. You have to turn off the faucet, mop up the water, and put it in the bucket that you have. So you could think of land-based carbon sequestration as being that bucket. There's only so much. So we look at solutions that reduce emissions. We look at solutions that sequester carbon. But we're not only wanting to directly reduce emissions from agriculture, like from fertilizer use, for example, or methane from ruminant livestock, but we also look at the sort of indirect emissions. One of the biggest sources of emissions from the food system is cutting down forests for more agricultural land. And almost all of that ultimately is used for cows, whether it's for grazing land or for soybeans for cows. So that we can start with reducing food waste, because somewhere between 30 and 4% of the world's food is never even eaten. It's just wasted. That would be a huge savings of reducing that kind of deforestation. Then we can try and shift diets to foods that have less emissions and require a lower land base. Again, ruminants look pretty bad there. So we're looking to both reduce emissions and sequester carbon. And that's where the cow part gets complicated, because there are ways to graze cows that are very sophisticated, fantastic grazing systems that have many, many benefits and are great for animal welfare and are great for water quality and all of that, and do sequester carbon, sometimes have pretty impressive carbon sequestration rates for a certain number of years, for a certain number of decades. Eventually that'll stop. And then at that point, those systems will begin to be a net emitter again of methane and nitrous oxide.
So we can basically eat cows for the next 30 years until they regenerated all the land. Then as the bucket is full, then we kill them all, eat them all, and then we basically become veganic farmers.
Well, that's one possibility. That's one possibility. It's hard to imagine a world where people don't want to eat some beef and lamb and goat and cheese, especially the cheese is just really hard for people to imagine life without. So, okay, so how do we do them better? First of all, there are some kind of underappreciated emissions reductions from grazing. Good grazing not only, in other words, sequesters carbon, but it can also reduce a little bit of the methane and a little bit of the nitrous oxide. So I think if we're willing to actually face the fact that animals that are grazing do produce methane and nitrous oxide, and they do, we can start to think about how to do it better. And in fact, their methane emissions are than animals in a feedlot, if you measure it per kilo of milk or meat. Because a more fibrous diet, and grass is more fibrous than grain, it just ends up producing more. And also they are slaughtered at a higher age. So they produce methane for more days before they die for a beef animal. But we can look at doing it better in terms of, we can appreciate what it's already doing in terms of emissions reduction. And there are some things we can do better. There are all this work being done on additives to feed that may be able to be helpful in certain ways. Although, again, truly grass-fed animals don't eat any grains, so you can't add anything to their feed.
Yeah.
They're working on some things that could be added to the water, because they all drink water. So maybe that might show some promise. What I really like, though, first of all, if you want to increase the carbon sequestration rate, you plant trees, because you have a much higher carbon sequestration rate in silvopasture than in even the best managed grazing systems. And you can do both together. So adding the trees gives you more carbon, way more carbon, 3 to 5 times more carbon.
Isn't it so that in some parts of the world, like in African savanna, it's almost impossible to plant trees?
There are places where it is too dry to plant trees. Yes, although even in many of those places, you can manage your grazing in such a way as to permit trees to grow. Whereas you couldn't plant a tree, you can just rest an area and not graze it for a while, and trees will grow in many places, including a lot of the like pastoralist areas in Africa. Have
Is
had
it yeah. Is it compatible with Alan Savory's view on holistic grazing?
I think if you take a nuanced version of his view, yes, he doesn't believe methane is a problem at all. And that's just like a fundamental, he's wrong about that as far as science is concerned. But I think the holistic folks haven't looked as much as I would like them to at trees, but there are indeed managed grazing systems that permit trees to regrow. And there's a system called pastoralist managed natural regeneration, which is happening in Eastern Africa, where just by pastoralist resting areas and allowing those trees to naturally grow, you can reestablish trees. You don't have to plant anything. There's no irrigation water required. It's zero cost. That's a great, and I've seen that happen also in Mexico. Actually, there's a kind of acacia tree that grows there in a place I work in Veracruz, where actually you overgraze the pasture when the tree pods are on. So they eat the pods of the trees. And then when you overgraze, it causes a lot of those trees to sprout. And then because the cows eat the pods and then poop out the seeds and then the trees grow. And then you just choose which ones you want to keep and allow trees to grow. You have to protect them. You have to graze in such a way that protects them for a few years until they're big enough.
You use the animals as tree planters, basically.
Right. So that's another example of not having to plant the trees at all. And those kinds of systems seem like the best ones to use where it's too dry to plant trees on their own, or where it's too expensive to plant trees on their own.
Yeah.
So another advantage of trees is that we have this problem of saturation where you've already filled up the soil with carbon. You're back to being a net emitter again, which again, is something that a lot of the grazing people don't want to admit or face. But the science very clearly shows this. And even in places where carbon continues to accumulate, like in the US prairies, historically, it's not actually sequestered carbon. It's in there very loosely. And the minute that a fire or bad grazing or whatever comes along, it's lost. So it's not held securely. However, we can harvest trees from a silvopasture and use them for a long-lived product like a building, and then plant a new tree or allow that tree to resprout. And then you've started the clock again. As long as that tree is continuing to grow actively for whatever that, 40, 50-year period, depending on the tree, you're now sequestering carbon actively in that field again. So silvopasture allows maybe millennia of grazing with a net, potentially with a net, carbon intake, with a net negative emissions, although there's no such thing as negative emissions. And the last thing is that some of the trees, like the honey locust pods, or also the mini trees whose leaves we feed to livestock, reduce methane emissions by somewhere between 10 and 30%. So I just feel like the trees are really a key part to making livestock more climate friendly. And there's been so much talk about grazing, and grazing is super important, but it's really missing out on the tree part, which is necessary to make the carbon sequestration last much, much longer, and also to reduce the emissions from livestock. Also, from a producer perspective, having trees whose leaves you can cut and feed during dry summers when the grass all turns brown is just a good idea for...
It's a lifesaver.
And we really see in Australia and some other parts of the world, and actually historically in Europe, we totally saw this for thousands of years, how important that tree fodder is for getting through extreme weather periods, for extreme droughts and so on. It also happens to have these benefits of methane reduction, and in many cases providing a very complementary nutritive value to what the forages are providing at certain times of year.
Yeah. So having those animals without trees is a big mistake because you have the shade, you have the extra dietary benefits. It's also medicinal. It's good for their bodies. It's good for cow comfort or comfort of other animals, so they produce more milk or more meat or better meat and better milk. And yeah, it reduces methane emissions. So it's like a lot of wins to do it. If you now zoom out a little bit and look at farming and how farming can help with the climate crisis. Would you think it is possible to get out of this climate crisis farming wise without the use of food forests or agroforestry?
No, I wouldn't, because if you let's say took your, and I would say it's not that there could be no pastures with no trees in them, right? I mean, there's reasons to do that, and there's certain kinds of birds that need habitat and grassland only and whatever. And in terms of the flexibility to be able to graze at certain times without worrying about the trees, whatever. But wherever trees can be fit, they should be there for sure. Oh, you have to space them so you can get your hay equipment through if you're going to be haying. There's caveats and whatever. But if you took, let's say, the rates of carbon sequestration from grazing alone and applied them to all the world's grazing land, and you took or grazing land on which managed grazing is feasible, which is not all grazing land, and you took the rates from, let's say, organic farming or conservation agriculture and applied those to all the world's cropland, that does not give you a sufficient carbon sequestration given the urgency of the climate crisis and the amount of carbon that we need to sequester. That's a smaller bucket that we're mopping that water into. But by adding trees where they make sense, and they can make sense in a great many more places than we're using them now, you just greatly increase the amount of carbon because the carbon sequestration rates are so much higher in the soil, but also in the roots of the trees, and also in the biomass of the trees, and also in the long-lived products from the biomass of the trees.
Yeah.
And because they enable us, if we harvest them carefully and replant them or allow them to resprout, because they then enable that to go on indefinitely instead of running out after 20 to 50 years, they're absolutely essential. So we can't get the scale of carbon sequestration we need without them. And also in the long term, thinking about by the end of the century, because they're a way to hack saturation, to hack the saturation problem. And because they offer us some opportunities to reduce emissions. With livestock, it would be primarily methane, and with crops, it would be nitrous oxide. I don't see us getting where we need to get without them, especially because emissions reduction more broadly for civilization has not gone at the pace we need. And agriculture actually is the only sector where emissions are continuing to increase rapidly from year to year, worse than transportation, worse than industry, worse than electricity. We really need them. However, you have to space the trees properly, and they have to be the right match of tree and crop or tree and grazing. And it has to work with the machinery if you're using machinery and all that. We can't just go willy-nilly. That's a US saying, I think, just randomly trying things. It has to be
well managed.
It has to be well managed.
Rational.
And
so the message is clear. We need more trees. We need more agroforestry. We need to eat more trees. We need our animals to eat more trees. A last question to wrap up this episode, because we are already pretty much going over our time because it's so interesting. Thanks for that, Eric. One last question. If you would have a magic wand and you could really do anything on this planet, what would you do with that huge responsibility and power?
It would be nice to make human beings act a little more rationally and a little more kindly. And in my field, that would partly mean thinking about food waste and thinking about the equitable distribution, the fair distribution of food. It would mean the ceasing of clearing of land for agriculture, and it would mean a more regenerative and perennial agriculture, including agroforestry and perennial crops and the home-scale food forest and all of those other things, because it's not for lack of biophysical potential in any way. That it's the people part is the problem. The human beings and our governments And our economic systems are the problem. It's not that the trees are not offering us this potential, because they absolutely 100% are offering that. It's really about us organizing ourselves in such a way to make it happen. That's really the magic wand is somehow about making people and our governments and economic systems functional in a basic way.
Yeah. So basically, you already have all the solutions that are out there. The magic wand would be like to point everybody in that direction. Say, hey, look, guys, if we would just like do this, then like most of our problems will be solved already.
Use the ones we have. Not that we don't need to continue to develop the new ones that are under development, but we could sure start with all the things that are ready now. We have a lot of things really ready now that we're just not putting to use.
I really enjoyed your nuanced vision, Eric. It's something that we really need in these times of screamers and of like very, how would I say, populistic views on some things that are, let's say, black or white. It's nice that you say, well, yeah, that's true, but this and but that, and that makes it very credible, every word that you're saying. Before we wrap up this podcast, is there any final words of wisdom you would like to share with our audience?
Well, they can find the Trees with Edible Leaves book for free in English and now Spanish, French, and German, and soon
Muy
in.
bueno.
So that's exciting. That's really exciting.
All right. Well, we'll definitely add some links in our show notes. So thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Food Forest podcast with Eric Toensmeier. You can go to foodforestpodcast.com and there you can see all the links to interesting materials that Eric has been talking about, such as the edible leaves, acorns, links to his books, and other interesting links to various topics, also about our trainings we give and designs we do. So see you next week for another great episode.